So as we all know, public diplomacy is traditionally understood as a sovereign nation's effort to inform and influence foreign publics through open communications. It is a vital practice to promote national security and economic prosperity through the generation of soft power. But now, public diplomacy is expanding as a field that integrates diplomatic, corporate, and social interests. Is what we call the increasing mainstreaming of public diplomacy. It includes actions taken by non-state actors of growing consequence in the global system. It also implies the requirements of engagement with not just foreign, but also domestic and in-between diaspora publics. And the field has become an increasingly interdisciplinary in theory, concept, and methods. Today, profound and influential societal shifts are reshaping the practice of public diplomacy, and by extension, its study, its pedagogy. Many of these transformative trends have been unfolding against the rapidly changing underlying technological and geostrategic conditions in recent times. While the coronavirus pandemic, along with its intersecting social and economic crises, does not alter the fundamental dynamics already underway that are disrupting our thinking and practice concerning public diplomacy, it is accelerating the change. So given that, how are we to rethink and reset the practice of public diplomacy? And I'd like to take a few minutes to share 5 broad observations. The first observation is that the pandemic obviously is posing serious, sustained threats to social and economic stability around the world. While containing a global pandemic requires unprecedented international cooperation, so far, for the most part, every nation has been fending for itself in combating the spread of the virus. And this has taught us an unflinching lesson that it is either to partner or to perish. This moment in history has highlighted our global interdependence. Everything depends on everything else, and the ways in which public diplomacy can be used to develop our capacity for mutual awareness, understanding, and collaboration, and to demonstrate solidarity and a sense of community. As the world emerges from this crisis, we must nurture and promote public diplomacy capabilities that will enable us to tackle shared challenges going forward, from the environment, cybersecurity, to health and emergency preparedness. My second observation is about recapturing the global imagination of America. The time also calls for a reset and a renewal of American soft power and public diplomacy. The mismanagement of COVID-19 pandemic in the US is increasingly seen around the world as a failure of governance in controlling a major public health crisis. America has suddenly become vulnerable in the eyes of the global public. There has also been uniform disapproval by foreign publics and governments alike of recent US international policies, from increasing tariffs on global imports, to withdrawal from international climate change agreements, to building the US-Mexican border wall. Meanwhile, the dramatic rise of bigotry and xenophobia, amplified by the excess of political rhetoric, especially in the digital space, undermines America's appeal and attractiveness as a nation of tolerance and inclusiveness. In a word, it weakens America's global standing. Now, the world recently watched the US elections with great fascination, lots of trepidation. Clearly, people around the world care about the election result, but above all, America's democratic system that has inspired populations throughout the world. My next observation concerns public diplomacy and our tech economy. The world economy is steadily connected and integrated. This is manifested in the sprawling worldwide economic relations, which now include the fast-growing cross-border trade through e-commerce and the rapid growth of emerging economies and markets. Technological advances provide a key capacity for globalization to develop and expand. Nowadays, every business is a tech business, so to speak, and our economy is a tech economy. As digital innovation is rewriting the rules of our society and economy and society, it also poses significant societal problems, and its future prospects remain indeterminate. We are seeking to establish norms and frameworks to guide digital practices and their associated business models, and to address the manifold implications as demonstrated in three broad policy areas, including data governance, the future of work, and a concentration of power among tech firms. The public's concern over digital technology and its deep personal as well as broad social and geopolitical consequences has increased, and it will only continue to grow. These technology-led developments and their attendant policy issues have a direct impact on the shape of the global marketplace. As some have argued, economic security is national security, because a stable global marketplace requires a functioning global order, which also includes a functioning level of digital trust. So there are important possibilities and in fact necessities to bridge the worlds of business and diplomacy, and to reimagine their linkages and their roles as we navigate through these complicated and difficult global policies and issues. Now, public diplomacy is also local. In foreign relations and communication, the compartmentalization of so-called domestic and international is perhaps only meaningful at an analytical level, but certainly not in practice. Examples abound of international policies and actions are extensions of domestic situations, as well as felt influences of international relations on domestic dynamics. Leaders at the local level around the world are embracing international affairs as it relates to a host of urban and community priorities, from economic development and cultural engagement to addressing mounting shared challenges. Subnational diplomacy, for instance, city diplomacy, is a powerful tool for international engagement at the local level. It provides a much needed anchoring mechanism to generate goodwill, reciprocity between communities and peoples across national boundaries. Its value has risen steeply at a time when national level actors often face or create political and bureaucratic gridlocks. Above all, to thrive in a globalized economy and a diverse society, local communities need cultural and global networks, skills, and competencies. And we need to build broad domestic public support for global engagement and responsible statecraft. Well, last but not least, the great power rivalry and the role of public diplomacy. A nation's socio-economic development engenders political power and international influence, with potential impact on the balance of power on the world stage. The political realignments in various parts of the world are multi-layered that defy a dichotomous either-or approach. It is a world of networks, as Anne-Marie Slaughter wrote, quote, intersecting and closely overlapping in some places and more strung out in others, end quote. And it is complicated as we look at the consequential relationship between the United States and China, with both converging and diverging interests and values. I am reminded of Walter Lippmann's admonition in 1943 that a nation's conduct of foreign relations, as in all other relations, can only be considered when commitments and power have been brought into balance. And Lippmann cautioned the US for prudence and restraint that were, quote, consistently practiced by the founding fathers, of not underestimating the risks of their commitments and of not overestimating their own power, end quote. In this age of global connectedness, there is no time to learn from our mistakes in handling critical matters like the US-China relations. Both nations need to exercise responsible statecraft by negotiating expectations of one another, as well as building effective mechanisms to settle disputes and induce agreements. At the same time, there is a vital probably paramount role that the so-called middle power countries, such as South Korea, can play in navigating the web of nuanced relations around the world. If we see the world as a web of networks, South Korea most likely possesses more power and influence than one might think. That is the soft power of connecting and bridging networks of stakeholders across political, economic, and social dimensions on the world stage. As we stand at this critical juncture, can we escape history that is captured in classic theories of great power rivalry? Or are we trapped by our own imagination that will only make the self-fulfilling prophecy come true? A reckoning from the momentous change in 2020 requires us to rethink our premises and our purposes of public diplomacy. Public diplomacy remains a vehicle to advance policies and to foster restraint and cooperation in dealing with other nations, other societies. It is biased against any form of rigidity and embraces adaptation. Indeed, public diplomacy reflects a nation's enlightened self-interest as opposed to predatory self-interest. It provides critical collective linkages between policy and people, and domestic and international. So I lay out some of these broad thinking and observations, and I'm sorry that my title of the talk says something about concept, practice, and pedagogy, and I hope that we'll have discussions in the future about all these specific areas. How are these trends are manifested in the way how we conceptualize public diplomacy, the skill sets we need to practice public diplomacy, and the pedagogy that's required for us to prepare the next generation of our public diplomacy, international communications professionals. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. And again, happy Thanksgiving. I think he laid out a number of interesting points. I especially like the very last point he made about the U.S.-China relationship and how public diplomacy would be able to serve as a guiding light in the rough waters that we expect in the future. Now we're back home. And we now have a keynote speaker from speech from Professor Moon Jung-in, who is the special advisor to the President of Korea. He doesn't need much introduction in Korea, but just for our participants from overseas, he is one of the most important voices in Korea's international affairs. He has been a institution at Yonsei University, and he hails from the great island of Jeju. So I think I pointed out all the important things. So Professor Moon, we'd love to hear about your speech on the strategic importance of Korea in the coming new world order.
Professor Son, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and I'm very sorry for upending the opening session of this wonderful conference. And Professor Jo Gi-suk, thank you very much for inviting me. I know that you're upset about me being late. And also Ambassador Chang Jae-bok, thank you very much for being here, because Ambassador Chang and I had a very long, the contact history. I met him at the UC San Diego when I was teaching there. And Ambassador Chang was, at the time, was a student. That was early 1990s, and the time really passes like an arrow. And in fact, I had a breakfast meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China, and one of the topics was public diplomacy, and it was very interesting in the coincidence of my breakfast meeting with him and my talk here. Professor Jo Gi-suk, the president of Korean Association of Public Diplomacy, asked me to give a talk on COVID-19, global transformation, and South Korean challenges, challenges to South Korea and how to deal with them. It's a really big topics, but I will try to conjugate those topics in very precise manner in 30 minutes. In 30 minutes or 20 minutes? 30 minutes? Okay, I will try to be, and it's short, shorter is better. Okay. Anyway, really COVID-19 was really like a sudden impact, like, asteroids hitting the Earth, We never expected these kinds of things. But there were warnings like, AIDS, MERS, SARS, and most recently Ebola. But we all thought, all these epidemics, we have a wonderful public health system, therefore we can overcome them. Therefore, this pandemic has never been part of our national security discourses. Okay? It belonged to public health domain. By the way, I'm not going to use a PPT. I will give a very straightforward talk. Shall I use, or which one is better? I will give this talk. Jay Wang did the same things. Okay. And throughout the history, there are many examples. So-called demise of Western Roman Empire. Okay, also the demise of a Han Dynasty, which is a really strong dynasty, but that came to an end because of spread of bubonic disease. Therefore, pandemics has a great impact on evolution of human civilization, as evidenced by Arnold Toynbee or William McNeill, and even most recently, Yuval Harari, or Jerry Diamond. Anyhow, we are now facing very stark reality. Now we have more than 50 million people on Earth suffering from the pandemic, and more than 1.3 million people died of the pandemic. And ironically, the United States has become the really focal point of the pandemic. And when we have pandemics, we always think about the developing countries in Africa, Middle East, or Latin America, Southeast Asia. But now, pandemic does not differentiate whether they are developing countries or developed countries. It has become widespread, touching 5 oceans and 6 continents. But it brought, as Jay Wang pointed out, really it had brought, transformational impact on world society. The economy is changing. In 1930s, we had the Great Depression. 2008 to through 2012, we had the Great Recession, and now we are going through the Great Lockdown. And now there is a worry that the current Great Lockdown could be much worse than the Great Depression of 1930s. Particularly, it is more so because we are now going through the second wave and third wave of the pandemic. Okay, growth is going down, growth rate is going down, unemployment is widespread, and the gap between the rich and poor getting worse as a result of the pandemic. And every country is now suffering from the huge public debts. Okay, if the pandemic becomes protracted, the government debt will be exponentially increasing. South Korea is not exception. Okay, therefore, impact on the economic system has been quite profound. But at the societal level too, now we are having a virtual reality. Okay, distant learning has become the new normal, and this kind of virtual conference has become new normal. We may not go back as before. Okay, and also, as several scholars have warned, including Yuval Harari, surveillance society has become new norms too. Okay, that could remind us of the George Orwell's 1984. And also, as a result of great lockdown, people are suffering from psychological distress, depression. Therefore, new normal is not really good normal. It is a really tragic normal. Okay? It's just really somber. Okay? And political impact is also great. Now every society is going through the big debate, which is better. All the countries, in all countries, strive toward achieving liberal goals as prescribed by the like in the theory of justice, John Rawls's political liberalism. They should extend the care to the worst in society. Okay, however, in reality, that is not the case. Great Britain, Italy, even Sweden, they have gone through the whole very utilitarian approach. Okay, save the young first, let all die, and this idea of herd immunity, which has been experimented in Sweden, ended up with very tragic result. The victims are old people. Okay, and there's a greater infection of the